Here are 3 facts about Madam C.J. Walker. 1. She is widely considered to be the first female self-made millionaire. 2. She was a philanthropist, regularly funding scholarships and donating to various charities and organizations, including the NAACP. 3. She did not deserve this shit. The Netflix original Self-Made, inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker, that distinction is mighty important, is a mini-series on the hair mogul's life and career. It follows her from poverty to when she decides to start her own business, and then to her life as an influential millionaire. And golly gee honey, it is trash. What's wrong with this series can be summed up in one question. Why does the Harlem Shake play in a show about Madam C.J. Walker, who lived from 1867 to 1919? Okay, I lied. That's not the only question, and it can't sum up everything, but it's a good start. I'm all for period pieces taking a creative risk by using music from different decades to highlight a certain aspect of it. Baz Luhrmann's The Great Gatsby is no masterpiece and is possibly my least favorite Leo DiCapricorn flick, right behind Critters 3.
You thought the fuzzy devils were dead, but you were wrong.
You're not as smart as you think you are.
Fuck you, April!
But I do admire the attempt to enunciate the glamour and glitz of the Roaring Twenties by use of modern hip-hop. But here, in Madam C.J. Walker's story, the story inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker, the music selection is not bold, it's not a creative risk, and it's not even attempting to enunciate anything. It's just sort of there. The fact is that there is so much wrong with this show that I'm not entirely sure where to start. So prepare yourself for a random list of categorical atrocities while I write them off one by one. There is simply no sense of time in this show. And I don't mean the good kind where it's like, oh, what do you mean I've watched 6 whole hours? It only felt like 10 minutes.
Okay, one more.
So good. How is it so good?
What time is it?
It's like daylight already. How did that even happen?
I mean, nothing in this show is even minutely aware of that little thing called pacing. Proper pacing gives a story a good build-up, which helps a myriad of things, but for a story like this, is especially important to the emotional payoff in the end. For instance, if I'm watching a show and I spend a decent amount of time with the main character and getting to know them, whatever their situation, their transition from point A to point B will mean something to me. By the final moments of the story, I will feel something of an emotional payoff because I learned enough of their beginning to appreciate their end. There is none of that here. Things happen, and they just keep happening. The show begins with Sarah Breedlove, that's Madam CJ's birth name by the way, living in St. Louis in 1908. This is roughly at the 50-second mark. We see her standing in a market trying to sell tins of hair product for the first time. She's nervous and a little bit desperate, and it comes across really well, and you can feel where she is emotionally, all thanks to the performance of Octavia Spencer, who deserves free massages for life because she carries this entire show on her fucking back. The story then backpedals to make room for Sarah to narrate about her struggles with hair loss, a very real thing that she did experience, which ended up inspiring her to start her hair care line. I single this out as being a very real thing because the rest of the show takes such liberties with her life that I have to cherish all the little nuggets of historical accuracy that I can get. Sarah holds our hand through an abridged history. We get glimpses of her first marriage, her hair loss, her financial struggle, then her meeting with Addie Monroe, a character she later has a completely over-dramatized, borderline ridiculous rivalry with. Her hair grows back, she gets a new husband, CJ.
Now I got me a new man, CJ, who loves me and treats me right.
Which is fucking hilarious. She then attempts to sell Addie Monroe's product because she truly believes in it, but Addie Monroe is kind of a colorist douchebag. Light on the kind of. By the 17-minute mark, Sarah has done so well with her business that she moves to Indianapolis with a plan to expand it. That means the show took 16 minutes to give you all that information and then some. You get 16 minutes to get to know Sarah and to care about her before she starts her journey. 16 minutes to, and I know I say this a lot, give a fuck. And how's that information given? Through narration, of course, which is perhaps, in my opinion at least, the worst way to do it, because it's the way that almost always guarantees an emotional disconnect, because I'm not experiencing these struggles with the character, I'm being told about them, so I feel almost nothing. And honestly, if Octavia Spencer had no involvement in this, I would probably just feel nothing. When Sarah moves to Indianapolis, we're shown that the year is now 1910. So we've covered 2 years in 16 minutes. Of course, we don't need a 2-year story that feels like it takes 2 years to tell it. The Odyssey is long as fuck, and Odysseus is gone for a long ass time, 20 years. But it doesn't feel like it takes 20 years to read the epic poem. We don't need the pacing to be molasses slow or like a dripping tap, but is it too much to ask that we spend time with this character that's meaningful? Is it too much to ask that we can establish her relationships in a better, more realized way? Not her just telling us that this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this time could have included how she gets her formula to work. To the creator's credit, a little time is spent showing Sarah mixing and remixing bad batches, but we don't see how she gets the formula to work. We never see how she gets the good batch, and that turns out to be an important piece of information later. We also don't see how her business grows from the ground up. There's no scene of her, for instance, making her first sale, not really. Suddenly she gets her formula to work. How? Don't know. Suddenly, she's in Indianapolis. Suddenly, her shop has its grand opening. Suddenly, she's a millionaire. The paths from point A to point B are riddled with an abundance of unimportant characters and unimportant situations, which only serves to make the pacing seem disjointed and disconnected. Along with our protagonists, we have Lilia Walker, Madam CJ's only daughter, played by Tiffany Haddish for some reason. CJ, played by Blair Underwood. Addie Monroe, who is meant to be an interpretation of the real-life hair mogul Annie Malone, who Madam CJ Walker actually worked with for a brief period before they went their separate ways. These 3 characters, 2 members of our protagonist's immediate family, and 1 cartoonish antagonist are the characters we spend the most time with. We also have a slew of other characters that range from either mildly unimportant to a severe waste of time and space. But before I wax querulous about the function of these characters, first let me bitch about how they're written. Firstly, Madam CJ's character in this show is the only one that has a function, a narrative, and somewhat of an arc. She's driven, she's passionate, and she doesn't give up easily. Even so, there are plenty of things that are wrong with how she's written, but a great performer can sometimes make a poorly written character seem like a good one. So let's all say thank you to Octavia Spencer for carrying this entire show on her back. Lilia Walker's use in this story is incredibly bizarre. I won't even get into all the details of fact versus fiction as it pertains to the show yet, but even without comparing real life to the dramatization, Lilia's narrative is just a mess of what seems like first draft character ideas all thrown together haphazardly in an attempt to make for a theatrical conflict, but what just feels like a poorly executed parody. Lilia gets married to a deadbeat guy who later conspires with Addie Monroe to bring Madam CJ down by revealing all of her business secrets, once again a thing that did not happen. Lilia is told by her mother that she needs to buckle down. She's told this several times, and it doesn't seem to really go anywhere. After moving up north, she starts a relationship with a woman who ditches her at a train station, like a little bitch. All that would be fine and good if it was true. Though even if it was, you can't just slap that on a character and call it interesting all by itself, because everything here is just so surface level that it feels pointless. I never see her develop throughout the course of the show. She's silly and carefree in a way that's meant to mirror the real-life Lilia Walker's joie de vivre, who was referred to by Langston Hughes as the joy goddess of the Harlem Renaissance. But this only comes off as immature and petulant. We don't see her steadily become more mature. She just all of a sudden decides to get her head out of her ass and buckle down. And we spend way too much time with her woes as a character for an important piece of development like that to be left out entirely. Blair Underwood is Sarah's second husband, who she actually has a pretty good relationship with, until he gets all in his feelings about her having a business and decides to fuck someone else so he can feel like a man.
I am a man, and Dora knows it, and that's why I slept with her.
There's some time spent with this character while he laments over his wife's success. He's very sad that he's not making all the money. It's really hard for him, you guys. And his dad's like, don't you dare cheat. And then he cheats. That's basically his storyline, and since it's so brief and not in depth, and make no mistake, it doesn't need to be in depth, it's bothersome that so much running time is dedicated to him grappling with new desires that eventually culminate into unfaithfulness. I don't mind this being part of the plot. If Sarah got cheated on by her husband and left his ass destitute, which she kinda did, good for her, that's fine by me. But don't treat it as if it's a key plot line that the overall story would be incomplete without. And for the last of our main characters, we have Addie Monroe. Remember, the story begins with Madam CJ losing her hair and meeting Addie Monroe, who helps her grow her hair back. After Sarah gets her business going and moves to Indianapolis, Addie follows her up there with the intent to steal her clients. Now, if she had clients, many clients, back in St. Louis, which she did, what would be the point of following Sarah up north? With no one else making hair products for black women in St. Louis now that Sarah's gone, wouldn't Addie want to stay because her business can go back to being her own? Wouldn't it be harder to go up north and try to start from scratch? See, it just doesn't make sense, but I have to pretend that it does. Addie obsesses over Sarah, steals her clients, hijacks her business meetings, steals her employees, and pays anyone who knows Sarah to give her details on her personal and business dealings. She's also obsessed with finding out what's in Sarah's product because she's convinced that Sarah has stolen her recipe. So we get two stories here. One of a black woman in the Jim Crow era defying expectations and clawing her way out of poverty and becoming America's first female self-made millionaire. And I guess because that wasn't interesting enough, we also get a story of a Scooby-Doo villain creeping around in fancy dress, stealing customers, and opening up salons. They try to make Addie sympathetic in one scene where she calls back home and talks to her mother. Her mother asks her to send money because Addie always sends money, and Addie's like, "Money's a little tight right now. This horrible woman has stolen all my clients." And remember, she says this after she's followed Sarah up to Indianapolis, after she abandoned all her clients, after she abandoned her business in St. Louis. No, I can't make sense of it either. The reach for sympathy doesn't really work though, because A, she's still a horrible character, and B, I just don't care. Because I don't care about anyone, because they're written like first drafts, and it shows. Not to mention that many of their plot lines, despite the characters being based off of real people, are majorly fictionalized, but we'll get into that later. For now, let's just harp on a bit about how all of these characters bouncing around in a clumsily written narrative do everything they can to make the story lose. This is a series inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker. No? Am I wrong? So why do we spend so much motherfucking time on other people, starting with Lillian Walker? Why should I care about her love story? Not only is there no evidence suggesting that it even happened, but it's boring as hell. If you're gonna lie about someone's life, why not make it interesting? What kind of monster lies to make a story less interesting? Who the fuck does that? I wanted to see a story about Madam C.J. Walker, about her business, how it started to boom, about how she grew confidence and certainty, about her personal feelings and her past and her pain, and how it all harnessed into power, and everything that makes you want to root for her and see her succeed. But I didn't get that. What I got was a story about Madam C.J. Walker's life that consisted of about 45% of her real life stories. I don't care that Lelia doesn't want to get married and is played by Tiffany Haddish for some reason. I don't care about CJ being miserable because boo-hoo, your wife makes more money than you. How fucking tragic. And I definitely don't care about a non-existent version of Addie Monroe that runs around being a weird little stalker. It's rushed with the pacing, its characters are weak, and whoever decided that all these plot lines were absolutely dire to the story made sure that it lacked focus, which again just adds to the whole sprawling narrative problem. Now, let's hop on this fact versus fiction dick. There's a story here, but unfortunately, it's not the story that should have been told. Part of the reason for the show's critical consensus among all the technical issues is due to how this proclaimed biography is almost entirely devoid of facts. But I can't be mad at them. After all, the decision was made to title the project Inspired by the Life of Madam C.J. Walker and not the Madam C.J. Walker story, because almost all this shit is made up. So many of the plot lines here are invented for good TV. They aren't accurate to Sarah Breedlove's life. The narrative of Addie Monroe, the reinterpretation of Annie Malone, is the first thing that comes to mind. While the two hair moguls did have a bit of a rivalry, it wasn't nearly as exaggerated as it is here. Annie didn't follow Sarah up to Indianapolis and try to scheme off her customers. She didn't pay someone to find out about the formula, she wasn't so obsessed with Sarah that it bordered on ridiculous, and her company wasn't failing. In fact, Annie Malone's company continued to do extremely well, and she was also You guessed it, a fucking millionaire. The reason every action Addie Monroe takes in the series seems cartoonish and unbelievable is because it is cartoonish and unbelievable. And again, fucking Lelia Walker. The real Lelia had an amazing story. So what's the point of fabricating it? Booker T. Washington makes an appearance with another confrontation straight out of Wattpad. This portion of the story also includes Sarah's encounter with Margaret Murray Washington, a woman who was a prominent member of the National Association of Colored Women. Now, I've watched the show a couple of times, as I do every time I choose to rant about anything. And it's this line right here, officer. This is the line that needs to be held in fucking contempt.
As I said before, it's just not our place. We live in a man's world.
History lesson. The National Association of Colored Women was established in 1896. The president was Mrs. Mary Church Terrell, who was a known political activist for civil rights and for women's suffrage. The vice president of NACW was Fannie Jackson Coppin. She advocated for women's suffrage, civil rights, and was very vocal about the higher education of women. In Self-Made, the character who says this line is chairman of the executive committee of the NACW, Margaret Murray Washington. She advocated frequently for Black women to pursue higher education. The NACW had objectives, many of which included the rights of women. I doubt that any of them, especially Margaret Murray motherfucking Washington, would have said this. And I know why it's written this way, so that Sarah Breedlove stands out as a pioneer of independent female thought. So it doesn't matter if it's true. It's going to help the character we took so little time to flesh out to begin with look stronger. Most of the flaws in this story all stem from the desire to tell a story that didn't happen. The writers or the showrunners or whoever were so irreverently impressed by their own spun-up tells that they didn't bother to leave room for things that did happen. They didn't leave room for the actual Madam C.J. Walker. In the end, this fascination with what could have happened, this fascination with bridging the gaps in history with soap operatic storylines, is what kills it for me. It's Madam C.J. Walker fanfiction and it's trash. I hate it. Thanks. Oh, remember how I said we never find out how Sarah gets her formula to work? Okay, so what had happened was, at the end of the series, Addie Monroe finds out that Sarah used her formula to make her products and they have it out. And it would have been a riveting scene if we, the audience, had any idea that Sarah took the formula to begin with. They could have shown us that this is how she gets her formula to work, but they don't. They don't even hint at it. All this time, I'm looking at this chick like she's crazy and paranoid, and you know, if I had this information, her trying to find out Sarah's deepest, darkest secrets would have put me on edge because I would think, oh no, she's onto us, but I didn't even know.